Rumours was Fleetwood Mac's 11th studio album, but only their second with the classic lineup of John and Christine McVie, Lindsey Buckingham, Stevie Nicks, and of course the ever-present Mick Fleetwood. The first album, simply titled Fleetwood Mac, proved to be a big success, hitting the #1 spot in the US and eventually going 4 times platinum, eclipsing anything the previous incarnations of the band had achieved. The record company and the band themselves really wanted to continue this success with their follow-up record, but the divorce of John and Christine McVie, the breakup of Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, plus Mick Fleetwood's divorce with his wife, cast a large shadow over this period of the band's career and influenced their songwriting massively. Despite the potential of a dour and negative record emerging from all this discord, they instead managed to channel all this emotion into something that is very uplifting and hopeful at times, and reflective and touching in others. It's widely considered their best album, and one of the best albums of all time. Coming off the back of a grueling tour, recording for the album began in February 1976 at the record plant in Sausalito with producer-engineers Ken Calais and Richard Dashut. Ken worked at Wally Hyder Studios and met Richard Dashut when he was mixing a live show for the band. Mick liked Ken and wanted him involved in mixing their single Rhiannon, but they already had someone lined up to do it. That fell through though, so Ken stepped in to mix it instead. Everyone was impressed with his work and they invited him to be producer-engineer for the next album. The first song they worked on had a working title of Keep Me There. This became The Chain and was a 5-way split in songwriting contributions, but began as quite a different song by Christine before the defining bass line and screaming final guitar solo were added. The process of working all these parts out took 9 months in the end, and it wasn't until the final 3 weeks of the sessions that they eventually got it all together. According to Ken Calais, Lindsey figured out how to connect everything. He took the verses apart, played a dobro and asked Mick to play a straight quarter note beat on the kick. Next, Lindsey rewrote the chorus and put a whole new rhythm to it. Everything then clicked just in time. The album's working title was Yesterday's Gone, a lyric taken from the song Don't Stop, written by Christine. This upbeat, forward-looking song is a great example of them taking the despair of the relationship failures and channeling it into glorious music. This was a complete juxtaposition from the actual atmosphere of the sessions that were very fraught, with the band no longer socialising by this point, and the personal lyrics would often be a bone of contention. Stevie hated it when Lindsey got even slightly literal. The song Secondhand News caused issues, as the minute Lindsey would start singing his lyrics, Stevie stormed out and the session would end. To make things even more difficult, their appetite for drugs, especially cocaine, was increasing also. One of the record plant's owners said that Fleetwood Mac took excess to its most excessive by taking over the studio for long and extremely expensive sessions, he stated. The band would come in at 7 at night, have a big feast, party till 1 or 2 in the morning, and then when they were so whacked out, they couldn't really do anything, but still tried to record. Nicks has suggested that Fleetwood Mac created the best music when in the worst shape. Ken Calais recalls things slightly differently though, and that the drugs weren't too much of a hindrance to the initial recordings, but then he was probably more worried about his own duties. Being relatively inexperienced in such an important role made Ken a little nervy initially, especially when they weren't really getting the sound they wanted at the beginning. The drums, for instance, sounded a bit lifeless, so they ended up erecting plywood panels behind them to liven the sound up, whilst also being aggressive with the studio's API desk 550A EQ modules, often boosting frequencies as far as the units would allow. Ken said, "I remember Richard and I almost got fired when we tried to record The Chain, because we spent 5 days on the drum sound. The band thought we were clueless." On drums, Ken recalls using the AKG 451s for the overheads, Sennheiser 441 on the kick drum, and an AKG 414 with a 20 dB pad on the snare. When jamming, live baffles were placed around the drums, with Mick facing John McVie, who also had baffles around his bass amp. John mostly played through his newly acquired alembic bass guitar, with the amp being recorded with an AKG 451 and SM57, with a direct signal also taken. This 451 SM57 setup was also used for Lindsey's guitar amps, which at the time were likely Marshalls and Hiwatts. Ken recalls, "I found that those two mics complemented each other, and if I put the 57 about an inch from the cloth, and the 451 about 2 inches from the speaker, a little off to the side, and then move the two faders up and down, I could completely change the sound radically, and you can get a really interesting effect." Adding to that, there was always a direct signal taken, although I didn't use that too much with Lindsey, unless we were feeding it to a Leslie. We had everything mic'd up for whatever effects we wanted. The Leslie was used to great effect on Dreams, the Stevie Nicks pen classic that features those beautifully smooth guitar lines, aided by a Morley volume pedal, creating that haunting sound that passes in and out. Ken said, "For Dreams, the electric guitars were sent through 4 different signals: a direct signal, a mic signal, a signal running from the output of the amp head, and another direct signal from a volume pedal. These were then panned in stereo, which allowed for the guitars to move across the left and right channels in a very majestic way. Lindsay's main electric guitars for the record were his 59 Stratocaster with an alembic blaster, which was essentially a signal booster, and his Les Paul. He did use a few different Stratocasters and Les Pauls and a Telecaster also. Christine McVie played a variety of different keyboards during the recording, including the Hammond B3 on Go Your Own Way, the ARP Selena string synthesizer on Don't Stop, also the clavinet and the Honor Pianet. She also played Rhodes on Dreams and tack piano on Don't Stop. They originally tracked this with an electric piano, but the tack piano, a piano with metal thumbtacks attached to the hammers, gave the track a totally different feel and, according to Ken, made the song bounce along nicely. For Christine's incredible Songbird, they ventured away from the studio to the Zellerbach Auditorium to record it. Before Rumours, Ken had worked on Joni Mitchell's album at Berkeley Community Theatre and suggested a similar approach to create the sonic environment for the song's recording. Ken said, "Christine sat on the stage and played a 9-foot Steinway, and she sounded magnificent. I used 15 tracks for the piano, 2 close mics, and the rest were distant mics. For something like Songbird, I wanted the room to really speak." For the vocals, Ken used the magnificent Neumann U47 tube microphone. Other vocal microphones used on the album varied depending on the singer and the song, with many different mics used, including the RCA 77, the AKG 414, and the Dynamic Sennheiser 441. This was a favourite of Stevie Nicks, as she used this for the recording of Dreams. Stevie wrote Dreams during the sessions for the record, when she didn't have much to do one day. They all really liked it, but Ken felt that it needed a precise, almost hypnotic rhythm to it, so ended up creating an 8-bar drum loop, remarking, "It's funny, but when people talk about the classic rhythm section of Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, and they point to this one song, I'm always amused that they're talking about a drum loop." Never Going Back Again features incredible guitar picking by Lindsay, but the sparseness of the arrangement did actually pose some problems for the recording. The metronome track used to set the tempo for the song was bleeding from the headphones into the guitar mics. The reason for this was that Lindsay's large afro-style hairdo was pushing his Koss headphones away from his head. To remedy this, they ended up taking an extreme measure of gaffer taping the headphones tight to his head. It worked, but it did prove difficult to remove them after. This wasn't the only issue when recording the guitar either, Ken remembers. "I noticed there was a big difference in how bright the strings were after just 20 minutes of playing. So I said, can we restring your guitar every 20 minutes? I wanted to get the best sound on every one of his picking parts." He said, "Sure." It took a long time to nail everything, all day actually, and I'm sure the roadies wanted to kill me. Restringing the guitar 3 times every hour was a bitch, but Lindsay had a lot of parts on the song and each one sounded magnificent. The only problem was, when Lindsay went to sing, he realised that he played all of his guitar parts in the wrong key, so we recorded everything all over again the next day, and had to dispense with the changing of the guitar strings. We lost all of that to get Lindsay singing in the right key. Another experiment Ken tried with Lindsay was using a Sony ECM 50B lavalier mic on his electric guitar to pick up the acoustic sound of it. Of course, the electric guitar doesn't produce a lot of sound acoustically, but he wanted to incorporate what it did and add that to the amplified sound, providing a sort of harmonic effect almost. One of the big reasons the record sounds great to me was the fact that Ken was very careful when recording not to hit the tape too hard and preserve as much dynamic range as possible, although it nearly was a sonic disaster, due to tape degradation after months of overdubs, including 4 months at Wally Hyder Studios, working on Lindsay's guitar parts. It got so bad that nearly all the high end was missing from the original tape. Luckily, they did have a backup, but this then needed to be synced in with the overdubs, which required specialist help. They brought in engineers from ABC Dunhill to manually control the vari-speed of the backup against the original. To do this, they used the hi-hat as a guide and listened to the phasing of the 2 sounds hitting together and reacted by adjusting the speed controls if they heard any movement. To get this right took many hours, but once it was done, the album was back on track, with just a few vocal overdubs remaining before completion. The band and their co-producers wanted a no-filler final record, in which every track should be a potential single. After the final mastering stage and hearing the songs back-to-back, the band members sensed they'd recorded something very powerful. Their intuition was spot on, as the album spent 31 weeks at number 1 and contained 4 top 10 singles. 10 million copies were sold in its first month. It's safe to say that it's a classic record, and in my opinion is one of the best sounding records of the 70s. It's a testament to the band and the engineers' commitment to make the best album they could make.